Never underestimate how far a small man with a little power will go to feel big. Some men build empires of commerce. Others, like Bartholomew Thorne, build fiefdoms of beige siding and meticulously manicured lawns. He was the president of the Summit Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and his reign was absolute, petty, and deeply, deeply personal. I, on my other hand, just wanted to be left alone. My name is Alex, and by trade, I'm an AI systems architect. I spend my days designing complex, predictive models for logistics companies and financial institutions. But my soul lives in the quiet, logical beauty of the natural world. That's why I bought the 20 acres. It was a perfect slice of wilderness, bordering a vast state forest on two sides, with a babbling, year-round creek defining its northern edge. The key to the whole property, the sine qua non of the deal, was a 50-foot wide, legally recorded deeded easement. It was an old dirt path that cut across a forgotten corner of what had recently become the Summit Ridge development, giving me the only practical access to a county road. Without it, my property was effectively a landlocked island. The day the letter arrived, printed on thick, offensively ostentatious cardstock, my quiet world tilted on its axis. It was from Thorne, in prose dripping with smug authority. It informed me that the HOA board had unanimously approved a community beautification and security initiative. This initiative involved, among other things, the construction of a 6-foot brick wall along their entire perimeter. My easement, my legal right-of-way, was to be paved over and entombed behind that wall. The letter ended with a flourish. We trust you will appreciate the enhanced property values and aesthetic appeal this project will bring to the entire neighborhood. It wasn't an offer. It was a decree. What Mr. Thorne and his board of sycophants didn't know was that my day job involved designing predictive models for incredibly complex systems, and they had just presented me with a very, very interesting system to model. They saw a quiet tech nerd on a plot of land they coveted. They didn't see a man who understood, with intimate mathematical precision, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And sometimes that reaction is a river. Have you ever dealt with someone who thinks rules are for other people? This story is for you. I promise it's a tale of how I used a forgotten state law, a few dozen terabytes of environmental data, and a little bit of AI-powered chaos to turn their brick wall of arrogance into a watermark of public humiliation. My first move was to try the path of reason, a path I would soon learn was unpaved and largely untraveled in Summit Ridge. I gathered my documents. The original deed from 1954 clearly delineating the easement, the county plat map with the right-of-way marked in indelible ink, and the legal opinion from my closing attorney confirming its permanence. Armed with this trifecta of irrefutable fact, I attended the next HOA meeting. The community clubhouse smelled of lemon polish and self-satisfaction. Bartholomew Thorne sat at the head of a long table, flanked by his board members, who all had the same look of vacant, bovine agreement. I waited my turn, then calmly and respectfully laid out my case. I presented my documents, explaining the legal concept of a deeded easement being inseparable from the land title itself. So, you see, I concluded, while I appreciate your desire for beautification, you legally cannot obstruct this access. Thorne didn't even look at my papers. He steepled his fingers, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. Mr. Mercer, he began, his voice oozing condescension, we are a community of progress. We operate under a modern set of bylaws you are not subject to, and frankly, not welcome to interfere with. Those old papers are quaint historical artifacts. Our master beautification plan, approved by our architectural review committee, is the prevailing document here. He then leaned forward, his voice dropping into a tone of mock sympathy. If you require access, I believe the state forest has some lovely old logging trails. Perhaps you could invest in a good all-terrain vehicle, the board chuckled. The other homeowners in attendance either studied their shoes or looked away, clearly unwilling to challenge their glorious leader. The message was clear, my facts were irrelevant. His power was all that mattered. A week later, the bulldozers arrived. I stood at my property line and presented the foreman with a copy of my deed and a cease and desist letter from my lawyer. He glanced at it, made a phone call, and then shrugged. My orders are from the HOA, pal. The check cleared. I watched, a cold knot of fury tightening in my stomach, as they tore up the earth, laid down a bed of gravel, and poured a pristine, black ribbon of asphalt over my century-old right-of-way. The bricklayers followed, and within days, a formidable wall stood where my path had been. A gaudy, brass Summit Ridge Estate sign was the final insult. I was landlocked. My quiet sanctuary had become a prison. That night, the frustration didn't curdle into despair. It crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of purpose. Thorne thought he had won by changing the facts on the ground. I would win by changing the ground itself. I fired up my workstation, the hum of the cooling fans a low growl of promise. My first act was to file a public records request with the county for every document, blueprint, survey, and meeting minute related to the Summit Ridge development and its vaunted master plan. Then, I began downloading data, decades of geological surveys, historical precipitation records, LiDAR topographical scans of the entire valley, soil composition analyses, and state environmental regulations. My world shrank to the glow of my monitors. Thorne had built his wall. I was going to build my case. The data flowed into my servers for days, a digital torrent of information that would become the bedrock of my strategy. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was an analyst, and Summit Ridge was my system. I tasked my custom-built AI with a single, overriding objective: find a vulnerability. It began its work, cross-referencing millions of data points, seeking patterns and anomalies that a human eye might miss. The HOA's master plan was the first key. It was a monument to suburban vanity, but it also revealed their grand ambition. Summit Ridge wasn't just a collection of houses. They were building a private, luxury resort on a sprawling parcel of common land. The plan showed a palatial clubhouse, exclusive guest cabins, and, the crown jewel, an 18-hole championship golf course. This was Thorne's legacy project, his personal Augusta. It was designed to attract wealthy members and elevate the community's prestige into the stratosphere. It was also their single greatest financial and emotional investment. The AI continued its churn, sifting through layers of history. It overlaid modern satellite imagery with historical surveys, flagging discrepancies. And then it found it. A single faint blue line on a topographical map from 1922, annotated in a draftsman's elegant script. Intermittent stream, this ghost of a waterway originated in the hills behind my property, flowed down through the valley, and historically had meandered directly through the parcel of land where Thorne was now building the back nine of his precious golf course. Decades of farming and later suburban development had diverted, buried, and ultimately erased it from the landscape. It was gone, but crucially, it was not forgotten by the record. My heart began to pound a little faster. I dove into a new data set, state water law. The statutes were dense, archaic, and utterly fascinating. I spent 2 straight days reading, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of electrifying possibility. And then I found the aha moment, the legal lever I needed. Buried deep within the state's environmental code was a provision, Section 23B7, titled the Historic Waterway Restoration Act. It was an obscure piece of legislation, likely written by a conservation-minded lawmaker decades ago, designed to encourage landowners to bring dormant streams and creeks back to life. It stated that a property owner could legally reestablish a historically documented waterway to its natural ancestral path, provided the restoration plan was environmentally sound, posed no threat of flooding to downstream properties, and underwent a rigorous state approval process. The law didn't just permit it, it actively encouraged it with tax incentives. The pieces clicked into place with the beautiful, chilling certainty of a perfect algorithm. My property was upstream. The HOA's golf course was downstream, and the historical path of that forgotten stream, a path I now had the legal right to resurrect, cut directly through Thorne's dream. The plan bloomed in my mind, not as a vague idea, but as a fully formed, data-driven schematic. This wouldn't be an act of brute force. It would be an act of surgical precision, executed with the full and enthusiastic permission of the state. I gave my AI a new, far more ambitious directive: design the complete Summit Ridge Historical Waterway Restoration Project. The objective was to simulate the rerouting of the permanent, year-round creek on my northern border, a creek Thorne had no jurisdiction over, into the old 1922 channel. My AI began running thousands of complex fluid dynamics simulations. It calculated the exact grading and excavation required on my 20 acres to create a new, gently sloping channel. It modeled the optimal placement of natural rock weirs and biodegradable jute and coir gabions to manage flow velocity and prevent erosion. It designed a self-sustaining ecosystem, specifying the native grasses, reeds, and willow saplings to be planted along the new banks to create a riparian buffer zone. It generated hundreds of pages of hydrological reports, sediment transport models, and downstream impact analyses, all demonstrating that the project would be a massive net benefit to the local ecology, creating new wetland habitats and reestablishing a vital wildlife corridor. The AI's final output was a comprehensive, unassailable proposal, scientifically rigorous and legally compliant. It was a masterpiece of environmental engineering. But an AI's report, no matter how brilliant, doesn't carry legal weight on its own. I needed a human, professional seal of approval. I researched and found the most respected environmental engineering firm in the state, a company known for its work with the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP. I hired them not to design the project, but to peer review my AI's work. I walked into their office with a terabyte drive containing the entire proposal. The lead engineer, a woman named Dr. Eris, was initially skeptical. After 2 days of her team poring over the data, she called me. Her voice was filled with a sense of awe. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "this is remarkable. The simulations are flawless. The environmental benefit models are sound. It's one of the most elegant and well-documented restoration plans I have ever seen. We would be proud to put our firm's name on this." Meanwhile, Thorne was living in his own reality. His resort was taking shape, a skeleton of wood and steel rising from the valley floor. He would post daily updates on the HOA's social media page, printing captions under photos of himself pointing at blueprints. "The vision is becoming reality," one post read. "Summit Ridge is setting a new standard for luxury." He was so blinded by his own reflection in the future clubhouse windows that he never once looked upstream. He had no idea that a force of nature, guided by silicon and statute, was about to make a course correction. With the engineering firm's official, notarized certification in hand, the plan moved from the digital realm to the bureaucratic one. I compiled the final application package for the State Department of Environmental Protection. It was a behemoth, nearly 500 pages thick, containing the AI's simulations, Dr. Eris's verification, the historical maps, the legal precedents, and a detailed, phase-by-phase implementation plan. It was designed to be so thorough, so overwhelmingly competent, that rejection would be virtually impossible. I drove to the state capitol and filed it in person, receiving a stamped receipt and a case number. Permit application #74WR23B7 was officially in the system. Now came the most deliciously ironic part of the process. State law required that all adjacent property owners be formally notified of the application via certified mail, giving them a 90-day window to review the plans and file a formal objection. A few days later, a crisp, official-looking envelope from the DEP was delivered to the Summit Ridge HOA office. I can picture the scene perfectly. Thorne, or his secretary, would have signed for it. He would have seen the subject line, "Notification of application for waterway restoration project on adjacent parcel," and, in his boundless arrogance, dismissed it. He was building a golf course, not a beaver dam. What did he care if his weirdo neighbor wanted to play in the mud on his own property? He likely tossed it onto a pile of unimportant mail, his mind occupied with choosing putting green turf and clubhouse chandeliers. The law only required notification, not comprehension. The 90-day waiting period was a masterclass in patience. I I spent the time preparing. I discreetly ordered the necessary materials: tons of smooth river stone, massive rolls of jute erosion control netting, and thousands of dollars worth of native plant plugs and seeds. They were delivered to the far side of my property, hidden from view behind a thick stand of pine trees. Every day felt like a week, but I held my nerve. My entire strategy rested on Thorne's hubris and the plotting, implacable machinery of government. During this time, I had one final, perfect encounter with him. I was in the produce aisle of the local grocery store when he spotted me. He swaggered over, a triumphant sneer on his face. Well, Mercer," he said, his voice loud enough for half the store to hear. "Still enjoying your new wall? I hear walking is good for you. Gets the blood flowing." He was practically glowing with smugness. I simply smiled back, a calm, genuine smile. "I'm exploring new paths, Mr. Thorne," I said softly. "You'd be surprised what you can find when you look at the old maps." He just grunted, mistaking my calm for defeat, and sauntered off toward the deli counter. He had no idea my new path was already surveyed, permitted, and aimed directly at his heart. On the 91st day, a thick manila envelope bearing the state seal arrived in my mailbox. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside, nestled among a dozen pages of legal jargon and stipulations, was a single sheet of heavy paper. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Permit granted, permit #74, WR 23B7 was approved, stamped, and signed by the director of the DP. I had the full, ironclad legal authority of the state to proceed with my project. I had won. Now, it was time for Thorne to lose. The very next morning, a convoy of professional, low-impact excavation equipment rumbled down the county road and turned onto my property, using a temporary access point far from Thornwall. The low thrum of diesel engines was a sweet symphony. It didn't take long for the commotion to attract attention. Thorne, flanked by two of his bulliest-looking board members, came marching down the edge of his property, his face a mask of indignation. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he bellowed across the property line, his voice echoing in the morning air. "You can't bring that heavy machinery in here. This is a violation of community aesthetic standards." I walked calmly to meet him, holding not a weapon, but a laminated copy of the state permit. "Actually, Mr. Thorne, I can't," I said, my voice level and clear. "This is my property, and I have every right to be here. And this," I added, holding the permit out to him, "is my full legal authorization from the state to conduct an environmental restoration project." He snatched the paper from my hand. I watched as his eyes scanned the document, his face cycling through a stunning palette of colors, from confused pink to furious red to a deep, apoplectic purple. He saw the official seal, the permit number, the signature of the department head, the name of Dr. Aris's prestigious firm. He began to sputter about HOA rules, about unapproved construction, about noise ordinances. "Mr. Thorne," I interrupted gently, "as I'm sure your lawyers will confirm, state environmental law supersedes your community's bylaws. Furthermore, your HOA was legally notified of this project 92 days ago and, by failing to respond, forfeited your right to object." He was utterly, completely speechless. It was a beautiful sight. He and his cronies could do nothing but stand there, impotent and fuming, as the first scoop of earth was lifted. They retreated, muttering threats of lawyers and lawsuits, but the sound was hollow. The river was coming, and the law was on its side. The work proceeded with the quiet efficiency of a well-orchestrated plan. The excavation crew, guided by GPS plotters loaded with my AI's topographical models, wasn't just digging a trench. They were sculpting the land, carving a gentle, meandering channel that looked as if it had been there for centuries. They shaped graceful curves, built up the banks with the excavated soil, and laid down the thick, fibrous jute matting to hold everything in place until the native plants could take root. It was a work of art, an act of creation disguised as revenge. The critical moment, the point of no return, arrived 3 days later. It was time to divert the creek. The crew built a temporary coffer dam upstream from the diversion point, causing the water to pool. Then, with surgical precision, the The excavator operator carefully breached the bank, opening the mouth of the new channel. At first, it was just a trickle, a thin finger of water exploring its new path. Then, as the crew slowly dismantled the dam, the trickle became a surge. The water, clear and cold, rushed into the channel my AI had designed for it. It obeyed the laws of physics and gravity, following the path of least resistance I had so carefully prepared. It flowed gracefully across my land, a shimmering ribbon of life, heading directly for the manicured border of Summit Ridge Estates. Thorne, I learned later, was in a state of escalating panic. He had his lawyers on speed dial, but they all told him the same thing. The permit was valid, the process had been followed, and I was within my rights. He called the county zoning office, the sheriff's department, even his contact on the state assembly. Every door was politely but firmly shut in his face. He had built his power on a foundation of flimsy bylaws and personal influence. I had built mine on the bedrock of state law and verifiable science. His structure was crumbling. The newly reborn creek reached the property line, marked by a flimsy, decorative wrought iron fence Thorne had installed. The water didn't even slow down. It flowed under the fence, kissed the perfectly manicured turf of the 14th fairway, and reclaimed its ancient bed. Thorne likely still believed it was a minor nuisance, a soggy patch on his pristine course. He still hadn't grasped the scale of what was happening. He hadn't seen my hydrological models. He didn't understand the relentless, unforgiving mathematics of flow rate and volume. He was about to get a very public, very wet lesson in the consequences of his own arrogance. The timing was so perfect it felt scripted by a vengeful god of comedy. That Saturday evening, the Summit Ridge HOA was hosting its Grand Investors and Prospective Buyers Gala. It was the culmination of Thorne's grand vision, a black-tie affair designed to dazzle and secure the final round of funding for his resort. A massive, elegant white tent was erected on a rise overlooking the nearly completed golf course. Thorne, resplendent in an ill-fitting tuxedo, was on a podium at the front, delivering a soaring speech about legacy, exclusivity, and a new paradigm of luxury living as he spoke. The restored waterway, now a steady and confident stream, continued its journey. It found the lowest point of the 14th fairway and began to pool, turning a wide swath of the green into a marsh. Then, it found its onward path, a shallow valley that led it directly toward the gala. Murmurs began to ripple through the well-heeled crowd. A few people pointed. Thorne, blinded by the stage lights and his own ego, droned on. But he couldn't ignore the disturbance for long. He faltered, his speech trailing off as he followed the gaze of his guests. He saw it, a stream of clear, cool water, now nearly 10 feet wide and a couple of feet deep, was gracefully bisecting his pristine golf course. It reached one of the course's signature features, a deep, clover-shaped sand trap guarding the 14th green. The stream poured into the bunker, and with the detached patience of nature itself, began to fill it. The brilliant white sand disappeared beneath the rising water, transforming the hazard into a picturesque, if entirely unplayable, pond. The investors looked on, their expressions shifting from amusement to alarm. Just as a wave of panicked chatter was about to crest, I made my entrance. I wasn't wearing a tuxedo. I was in clean jeans and a work shirt, my boots still dusty from overseeing the project. I walked to the edge of the crowd, a silent observer. Thorne's head swiveled until his eyes locked on me. He pointed a trembling finger. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with fury. "You did this!" The entire crowd turned to stare at me. I held up my hands in a placating gesture and raised my voice to be heard over the gurgling of my new creek. "Mr. Thorne is absolutely correct," I announced, my voice calm and steady. "How to do this? It's called the Summit Ridge Historical Waterway Restoration Project. It was fully permitted and approved by the State Department of Environmental Protection." I pulled out my phone, and using a small, pocket-sized projector, I beamed an image onto the white canvas wall of the tent. Displayed for all to see was a high-resolution image of the state permit, followed by the certified mail receipt for the notification, clearly signed by Thorne's own HOA secretary. Finally, I played a short, elegant AI-generated animation showing the historical 1922 map overlaid with the current resort plans, the blue line of the ancient creek flowing exactly where the real water was now flowing. As you can see, I continued. The Summit Ridge HOA was notified 3 months ago and chose not to respond. All I did was put the water back where nature intended it to be. Thorne stood on his podium, mouth agape, looking like a fish in his own brand new pond. The investors weren't looking at me with anger. They were staring at Thorne with the cold, hard eyes of people who had just seen their money flowing away downstream. The creek, indifferent to the human drama, continued its inexorable advance. Having filled the sand trap to the brim, it found its outlet and pressed on, following the precise path my AI had predicted. It carved a new channel across the 15th fairway. A hole Thorne had boasted was the most beautiful and challenging par 5 in the state. It finally came to rest in a large, low-lying basin directly in front of the multi-million-dollar clubhouse, the intended site for an outdoor wedding pavilion. Over the next few hours, this basin slowly transformed into a burgeoning wetland, much to the delight of a family of ducks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The resort's intended centerpiece now had a prominent water feature, just not the one advertised in the glossy brochures. The gala was over. The investors fled, whispering into their phones and avoiding Thorne's frantic attempts to explain. The story, however, was just beginning. One of the horrified guests had a cousin at a local news station, and the tip was too juicy to ignore. By the next morning, the headline was on the front page of the digital paper. Tech genius legally reroutes river through pompous HOA's golf course. The article was a viral sensation, complete with photos of Thorne screaming on the podium, contrasted with serene images of the beautiful new stream winding its way through his ruined course. I was portrayed as a folk hero of property rights. Thorne became a statewide meme for arrogant incompetence. His threats of lawsuits, which he had been shouting at me as I left the gala, evaporated as soon as his lawyers saw the news, and more importantly, my permit. They informed him, in no uncertain terms, that he didn't have a legal leg to stand on. In fact, he was now the one in legal jeopardy. My project had put a massive spotlight on the Summit Ridge development. The DEP, embarrassed by the public fiasco, launched a full investigation into the original resort permits. They quickly discovered that Thorne's allies on the county planning board had conveniently overlooked the same historical waterway data I had found. The house of cards collapsed. The state issued a stop-work order on the entire resort. Fines were levied against the HOA for the permitting violations. The remaining investors, seeing nothing but a legal quagmire and a waterlogged construction site, officially pulled all funding. The internal fallout within Summit Ridge was seismic. The homeowners, who had been promised soaring property values and a luxury paradise, were now facing a defunct, half-built money pit and the certainty of massive special assessments to cover the legal fees and fines. An emergency HOA meeting was called. It was less a meeting and more a public execution. Thorne was removed as president in a unanimous vote of no confidence, his reign of petty tyranny ending not with a bang, but with the gurgle of a creek he had been too arrogant to see coming. The aftermath was surprisingly swift and satisfying. The newly elected HOA board, a group of shell-shocked homeowners desperate to stop the financial bleeding, approached me with a humility Thorne could never have comprehended. Their very first official act was to hire a crew to demolish the section of brick wall blocking my property and to tear up the asphalt they had laid over my easement. The old dirt path was restored, and they presented me with a formal public letter of apology, which was also posted on the community website. The creek, of course, remained. It had become a permanent and, ironically, beautiful feature of the landscape. Property values in Summit Ridge didn't plummet. In fact, after the initial shock, the homes bordering the new Restoration Creek became highly desirable. Nature, it turned out, was a better designer than Bartholomew Thorne. My small war had broader, unforeseen consequences. The Summit Ridge fiasco, as it came to be known in legal circles, became a celebrated case study in state law schools and environmental planning programs. It prompted the state legislature to review and strengthen the environmental oversight process for large-scale developments, closing the loopholes Thorne had exploited. My personal victory had, in a small way, created a positive ripple effect, ensuring that historical environmental features would be better protected across the state. I got my access back, and with it, the peace and quiet I'd sought from the beginning. But the experience taught me something profound. The world is an impossibly complex system, governed by layers upon layers of rules, the laws of man, and the more powerful laws of nature. Most people, like Thorne, only pay attention to the rules that benefit them, and they assume they can shout down the rest. But true power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from understanding the entire system, the legal code, the lay of the land, the flow of water, the weight of hubris. Knowledge, not anger, is the ultimate leverage. The moral of this story is simple. When you're pushed, don't just get mad, get smart. When a bully tries to trap you by inventing their own rules, the most elegant and enduring victory comes from beating them with the real ones. Because in the end, the law, whether it's property law or the simple law of gravity that pulls water downhill, is patient, implacable, and always gets the last word. So, what's the most creative way you've ever seen someone use the rules to their advantage? I'd love to read about it in the comments.